It's time to take a test. Your assignment is to pick up your marker or your crayon and color this picture. You will be graded on how well you fill the space. A penalty will be applied each time you cross one of the lines. And one more thing. Your scholarship to attend this university is dependent on passing this exam. If you fail, you're out. How's that? Now, if you took this test, the work you turn in would probably look something like this. The colors are beautiful, but you were very careful to avoid those lines. You were so careful that you left this white space. Now, if you had colored inside this white space, your grade would have been better. But then you would have risked crossing those lines, maybe so many times that you failed my exam, lost your scholarship, and had to leave the university. So that's coloring inside the lines. What does it take for a person to color outside the lines? What does it take to innovate? Now, they tell you that innovation is all about you deciding to take a risk. But I'm going to tell you that it's also about what society allows you to do. And that if we want the best ideas to come forward, we have to listen to people other than the privileged few. Now, I'm Mexican-American, and I grew up in Central California in a city surrounded by farmland. And when I was growing up, it was an unsaid fact that the consequences of breaking the rules were greater for the Mexican kids. You know, a small transgression like cutting in line or being a little bit rough on the playground might have been seen as cute or a learning opportunity if one of the white kids did it. But if a brown kid did it, the rules were always enforced and the penalties were always applied. And as a child, you only have to see this once to know that it's true. Now, when I was a kid, I was really into computers. Really into computers. By the time I was 10, I could program in 2 different languages. And that was the year the first Macintosh computers were released. Remember that? I went to the fanciest department store in town and saw one on display, and it was amazing. The screen and the computer both fit in one sleek box. And there was a new thing called a mouse. And you used it with your hand to control the computer instead of having to memorize a bunch of commands and type them in on the keyboard. And I had to see how that mouse worked. Now, when I got there, there was a white kid who was checking out the computer. And I waited about 10 minutes, and he moved the mouse around and clicked a lot. And eventually he got bored and moved on. And I stepped up, reached out, and just as I touched the mouse, a saleswoman appeared and stopped me. And she said, "Children are not allowed to try out the computer." I got caught. She saw this Mexican kid reaching for that expensive equipment, and she decided it was time to enforce the rules. It's probably the first time I realized that some people were going to treat me differently because I'm Mexican. Now, when you're a brown kid growing up in that environment, you don't just get to try things out. You have to know the rules, and you have to ask for permission. And if you want to get ahead, you have to stay well away from those boundaries. You cannot cross those lines. And so I trained myself to reflexively avoid those boundaries because anything else was too risky. Now, coloring safely inside the lines is what made me successful because it made me a model student, always meeting every expectation, always following every rule. And so I did very well academically. And I got to go to great universities. And then I had professional opportunities that my family had never dreamed of. Eventually, I became a scientist, and I even landed my dream job of becoming a professor. And when I became a professor, I got to establish my own research laboratory. And when I did, I decided to lead my team to do the same things that had led me to be successful. We played it safe. We did science in which we asked questions where we pretty much knew what the answers were going to be. It's just they hadn't been proven yet, which is the scientific equivalent of coloring safely inside the lines. We played it safe. We stayed in our lane. We didn't push the boundaries, and it was great. We had research funding. We published scientific papers, and I even earned tenure, which meant that I was accepted as one of the few brown scientists. But I had always dreamed of making one of those groundbreaking discoveries, the kind of thing that might change the world. And I saw some of my white colleagues, and they'd come in and set up their laboratories, and they'd do this really innovative science, and they'd win prestigious awards, and their careers would take off. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try that. So there was a call out for a blue sky type award. It's a scientific award where you do really innovative, out of the box work. And I put together a proposal. And I wrote 46 drafts of the proposal over a 7-month period because I knew it had to be perfect. And then I got a meeting with the program officer. This is one of the people who decides who gets the award. And I gave him a well-rehearsed presentation. And he listened to my pitch and said that my work was not appropriate. It was too incremental. I had colored inside the lines. I was crushed. I felt like I had put all of my expertise and all of my training into that proposal, and it still wasn't good enough to make it to the top. Because you see, coloring inside the lines doesn't change the world. Now, I thought it was just me, but as my career progressed, I was asked to review the work of other scientists. And sometimes I would see that same incremental, safe approach that I had been using. And one day I realized I had something in common with those authors. We were all members of underrepresented groups: Black, Latino, Native American. And I remember thinking, maybe they grew up the same way I did. And their only way to get into this profession was to color safely inside the lines. I mean, think about it. In our society, who of all the famous disruptors and innovators are Black, Latino, or Native American? Now, in the US, the largest scientific funding agency is the National Institutes of Health, and they have a special program they call High Risk, High Reward. This is for the really innovative stuff, the stuff that could potentially change the world. And about 10% of the bioscientists in the US are members of underrepresented groups. But since 2021, the number of underrepresented scientists who've received one of these high-risk, high-reward awards is so small, the agency can't even tell us. All they can say is less than 5%. So I'm wondering, how much less than 5%? Who gets to disrupt? Who gets to innovate? Who gets to think outside the box, move outside the lines, and push the boundaries? It's those who are allowed to do their best because they don't have to worry about losing their scholarship. It's those who are allowed access to the newest technology and ideas without having to ask for permission. It's those who are allowed to innovate. Because coloring outside the lines is a privilege. Now, I realized that if I wanted a chance at doing some of this groundbreaking work, making a groundbreaking discovery, I had to stop accepting the incremental success that came with coloring safely inside the lines. I had to take risks. I had to swing for the fences, but most importantly, I had to reclaim that curiosity to ask a question when I didn't know if there was an answer. So in my laboratory, we started doing new things. We started combining disparate areas of science to see what would happen. We asked how mechanical engineering could be useful to microbiology. We asked how probiotics might be helpful for bones and joints. And we didn't know what would come of this. We weren't focused on the answers. We were focused on the possibilities that these investigations might reveal. And not everybody was supportive of my new approach. I have a senior colleague who would sing the praises of my white colleagues when they were named new innovators. And this person saw what I was doing and came to me and told me that I needed to be careful. I needed to focus on my expertise. And I heard the message. Stay in your lane. And to hear that from somebody I looked up to and respected, no matter how well-meaning that person was being, was the most disheartening part of this process. Now, moving my lab in this new direction, it was like running a marathon on a road full of potholes without even knowing if there was going to be a finish line. It took years. I took pay cuts over many years to make sure we had the funds to keep the work going. And every month, I would look at the lab finances and see them getting slimmer and slimmer. And I would ask myself, maybe we should just go back to doing the safe, incremental, and successful work we've been doing before. But we didn't. And about 6 years into the process, we started seeing some of the benefits. I presented some of this new work at a scientific conference, and afterwards, a senior colleague took me aside and she said, "That is amazing. You are so brave to be moving into this space." So we decided to try again. There was a call for a different kind of blue sky proposal, and I put together a proposal for it, and I spent a month doing it with just a few drafts. It wasn't perfect. We didn't know what the answers would be. We didn't even know if what we were proposing was even possible. But this time when it came back, it wasn't called incremental. We got the award. And I was so happy. And I remembered I had submitted the same idea 10 years earlier. But at the time, nobody believed that I could color outside the lines. So this safe approach, this thing that was the only path for me to succeed, was the thing that was holding me back. The approach that allowed me to beat the odds and become a tenured professor was the same thing that was keeping me from reaching the top. Because you see, innovators don't look at the lines when they color. They paint their own picture. Now, we're not just talking about space on a page. We're talking about that space you need to be working in if you want to push the boundaries of what's possible. And not everybody has that choice. If you lead a team, who do you go to when you need new ideas? The brown person? The immigrant? The woman? Have you given them the choice to push the boundaries? There are a lot of hard problems out there, and if we want to solve them, we need ideas from the people who didn't have that choice. Listen to them. You might be amazed at the picture they will paint when they're not coloring inside your lines. Thank you.